Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, who is the Executive Director of the Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Daniel, good to have you with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Good. Daniel, we have a special guest today, and his name is John Whitehead. And John, welcome to our program.
Hey, thanks for having me on, sir.
John is an enthusiastic supporter of civil liberties. He's been involved for a long, long time. He started the Rutherford Institute in 1982, so he's been at this and has done some many great works. But one thing we want to do today is to talk a little bit about his new book, Battlefield America, and the subtitle is The War on the American People. I do want to read what our friend Judge Napolitano said. He says, "I challenge anyone to read this book and then try to go to sleep. I found that impossible." So that ought to get some people interested in reading it. But John also 2 years ago had a book, A Government of Wolves, which is a very popular book, and I understand it's still selling very well. So he's on to a very important subject, and one, of course, that we have dealt with at this channel for a long, long time, and that is of civil liberties. And John, why don't you give us a brief update of where we are right now? You started in 1982. Has it been all downhill? And what is your goal when you have had the Rutherford Institute? You've had several books. You've had these two very successful books. So what is your ultimate goal, and how do you see things going?
I want people to wake up to the reality of what's going on around them. I mean, a lot of people I talk to don't seem to know what's going on. Seasoned journalists I talk to, I've actually said on some of the so-called mainstream shows, do you realize there's 80,000 SWAT team raids going on across America on an annual basis? And they go, oh, what? You know, like they don't know what's going on. They don't report it. And we, you know, Dr. Paul, we live in a surveillance state right now, a militarized police state, and I'm trying to get people to wake up and to get active. I think there are things we can do. I think you look at some of the great historical figures as Martin Luther King and others who got active out there. We can do some things, but we're going to have to wake up really soon to what's going on. Hopefully some people are waking up right now. The American society I see right now, in my opinion, is undergoing a nervous breakdown. We could be moving and transitioning into a super surveillance state. It looks like that's what's happening to me. I think we can change some things, but I think you're going to wake up to that reality, get tuned in. Nothing's changed. Obama was supposedly going to demilitarize the police. That has not happened and will not happen. The NSA, as you know, through the USA Freedom Act, was not reformed. They're still downloading 2 billion of our emails on a daily basis, 400 million text messages, and hacking into 160,000 Facebook pages on a daily basis. They're still doing what they're doing. So we live in that state, and I'm looking around today, and I'll be honest with you, I'm like Judge Napolitano when he said he had trouble sleeping. As I see the current events happening across this country, this Confederate flag hubbub going on right now, it's right out of Orwell's book, 1984, Newspeak. How do you get people to stop thinking? You take away symbols, you take away words. People don't debate anymore, and they become like complacent sheep. And I think that's exactly where we're headed today.
Right.
Well, I have to say that at the Institute, we feature your articles with your permission quite often, and I have to say, reading them, first of all, it is a real fright, but I have to say it's a delight to read because you pack so much information. It's all so well sourced, and it is just an incredible thing to read these articles that John does every week. But, you know, one of the things I wanted to ask you, John, you sort of touched on it just now, but as I read your work and think about it, I think about the media, the mainstream media. You know, a couple of months ago, I think you did an excellent column on the reality TV show and how it just anesthetizes people's brains. But how do you, when the media tells us, hey, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear, how do we break through this hold that they have really on the majority of the population?
Well, they have a tremendous hold. You know, they form public opinion, and as I show in my book, The Battlefield America, Carl Bernstein of Woodward Bernstein fame said that the CIA, NSA, they vet newspapers and TV channels. They mentioned some of the larger ones, New York Times. They're vetting news. It's going to be difficult. As I show in my book, the average American watches 150 hours of television a month, and I'm talking about, you know, mainstream media, reality shows, and all that garbage you see on television where people don't think anymore. What I'm asking people is, hey, if you really believe in freedom, you're going to have to turn the television off for a while. Maybe give me 1/3 of those hours, or the nation 1/3 of those hours for freedom. The average young person, by the way, is up on screen time today on either a cell phone, a laptop, or whatever, 8 hours a day. If you're tuned into that unreality, and it is unreality, we live in a real world. The virtual world, you're not going to do much at all. So how to get people off of those today? I see it as an addiction and a drug. And as I show in my book, these social psychologists saying we're facing cultural death if we don't wake up pretty soon and get active in our local communities. And I think that's where we have to start.
Well, John, there was one quote that you used in your book that caught my attention, and once again, this gets people's attention, and that is you used Hitler as a quote. And he says for what he wanted to have success, that you have to have constant and regular employment of violence. And that says a lot, and that's what you're talking about. From what I read and what you're saying is there is a lot of violence, but it looks like it's violence of the state against the people, whether it's through propaganda or the physical violence and the spying and the arrests and all the laws and rules and regulations. But you know, the one thing is we do use labels, and in this case, I think the libertarian principle of no violence sort of contradicts everything that Hitler says, because we take a pledge not to initiate it. But once again, on the labels, what I like about what you do and say, and I make an effort to do this, is to wake up not just the hardcore libertarians, they generally are pretty good on civil liberties, but you know, this is an opening for constitutional conservatives, good, decent liberals who are sincere, and then you have the libertarians. So in many ways, we bring together, and it has to do with the very theory of your book, and that is the use of violence and how are we going to curtail the government's use of violence. But as far as I can tell, as long as people want the welfare state and the warfare state, they've endorsed violence, and that is our challenge, I think.
Yeah, a lot of people do endorse violence. I mean, when I write some of my columns, I'll get it from different directions saying, why would you criticize the police? Well, I'm not basically criticizing all police, but I'm criticizing the cop who shoots an unarmed citizen in the back, who slams someone who disagrees with him on a sidewalk, who doesn't want to show an ID, slams them face down and breaks their skull open. But you mentioned Hitler. That's how the Nazis transitioned. Like I say, the government, the society I see right now, to me, is undergoing a nervous breakdown. It happened in Nazi Germany, and I talk about it in my book. They used that to transition into a total surveillance state where everybody was basically controlled. And people forget, in Nazi Germany, 80% of the population most of the time lived pretty well. It's that 20 or 30% they were shelling off to the concentration camps. But that's the kind of situation we're moving in now. Like I say, I think we're in a transition right now into a total surveillance state. And Aldous Huxley said it in his writing, Brave New World Revisited. That was the transition. When they start cracking skulls, people get afraid, they start getting in line, and they don't object anymore. And I'm seeing that across the quarters. There are some people who are standing up, but as you say, quoting Hitler, he knew well. Another quote in there by Hitler, by the way, he says, if you can get people together in groups and make them march and Sig Heil, they stop thinking. As I show in my book, scientists say when you get people in groups and get them together and they go, oh yeah, and they all march in the same direction, no one's thinking. And one social psychologist called it we-ness. In other words, we get together and we do this, but that individual starts looking strange. The Ron Paul, the John Whitehead, whoever is out there saying we don't disagree, and so you get kind of pigeonholed. But the thing is that I see a growing movement, by the way. A lot of young people are getting fed up with what's going on, and they're starting to distrust the government more and more. And James Madison said it best, the fellow who wrote our Bill of Rights: we ought to mistrust all those in power And I say that should be the philosophy of every American citizen.
Right.
That's a great point about people stopping thinking. You know, Gustave Le Bon wrote the famous book about the mob and the mob mentality, and you made a reference to it earlier in your talk. We're seeing a lot of that today. People want to rip down the Jefferson Memorial now, and they're ripping down statues, and it's like this kind of collective insanity when this happens. But you know,
it's newspeak. It's right out of Orwell. If people are not debating, I mean, how do you destroy history? You have to completely destroy it so people don't think about it anymore. We don't want to think about slavery anymore. We don't want to think about those things. As I quote Rod Serling, the guy who wrote the Twilight Zone series, in a great commentary, he says, we need the concentration camps to keep standing even though they're empty as a reminder of how cruel we can be. We need those landmarks. But people, again, I don't think the government, the mainstream media, which they seem to work hand in hand, they don't want us to think. If you think, you start rebelling. And what George Orwell say? You can't become conscious until you rebel. So give me a few more rebels out there,
Right.
folks.
John, I want to ask you about a specific case going on and see how you analyze this. And it has to do with an event that's ongoing or coming to Texas, and that's that Jade Helms issue. It involves, you know, the use of the military and the concern that even our own governor has expressed. Of course, we've seen the U.S. military training in different states, you know, numerous times. So do you see this a little bit differently? Should we be concerned, or should we try to calm people down and say, hey, look, the military's been in every state and they're welcome because that brings money to the state. So that's sort of a mixed bag, but in Texas it's a big issue, as it is for a lot of other people around the country. What's your assessment of this?
Well, my study of Jade Helm, you know, the slogan for Jade Helm is mastering the human domain. Well, I looked in to see what in the world were they talking about, mastering the human domain. And what the military has come up with this idea, and this is not just the military, by the way, this is working with the NSA and the other groups, is they're infiltrating the population, the military. They're learning how to put down, basically find who the rebels are. It's almost like predictive policing. They're studying how to do this. By the way, the Department of Defense has the Minerva Research Initiative now with a number of universities. They're actually doing research projects on how to put down civil social unrest. Well, you know what that is. That's free speech activity. So in my opinion, a lot of this Jade Helm stuff is basically coordinated by behaviorists, by the way. And we've actually studied the urban crisis actors. If most people don't know those exist, they're coordinated by the Department of Homeland Security and other agencies. They're hired actors. They study with behaviorists on how to infiltrate groups. The FBI, by the way, has been doing that since the 1960s. But infiltrating groups, some of them were actually in the Ferguson protest and the Baltimore protest. But so I think what's the concern the government is now, I think they're trying to predict if there's a great social unrest, and unrest might be an economic collapse or whatever, or people just get fed up, is how to put it down very easily. And it will be by infiltration initially, but sooner or later it will be cracking skulls if they think people get out of hand. So should you be concerned about Jade Helm? Yeah, if you really study it, and I'm by the way, in a couple of weeks I'm doing a column on it where I'm going to be talking about all this stuff. But no, it's pretty freaky stuff. It's the government using psychological and behavioristic methods to control the population.
You know, John, I was in the Congress during the episode for 9/11 several years afterwards, but that was a big event for everybody in this country, and of course the Patriot Act came of that. And 9/11 and this whole thing I see as being used as an excuse for something they wanted to do anyway, because we know that the Patriot Act had already been written, but you know, with the and they were ready to go. So, but would you agree that they were able to use this crisis very well to do exactly what they've been wanting to do? At least a lot of people in Washington wanted to do all along.
Oh, sure. The militarized police, the Department of Homeland Security, as you know, was created initially through an executive order. You get the Department of Homeland Security now, which is militarizing all the police, handing out all these electronic devices like Stingray devices police use to download your cell phone devices and all the stuff they're doing. Fusion centers came about where they're watching everything you're doing, anything you do electronically. That all came about through 9/11. And sure, I think they use it very, very well. Again, I've sued the President of the United States. I won, by the way, Bill Clinton. I've fought politicians, And when I've been involved in any cases, I found out very carefully, they have very well staffed behaviorists, psychologists that work with presidents and politicians. They know how to do it. The American people doesn't realize it. And here's the thing I say. That isn't the government, folks. You are the government. You won't be the government. We are the government. It's time to start being the government and saying, stop this stuff. We're going to take control. And if you want it, you're going to get cracked in the skull, but we can stop it. So, and I think you're correct. They use any event to assume more control because, again, I quote Orwell, the ultimate ends of power is power and control.
Right. Well, John, we have to finish up, and I want to thank you very much for being on the program. And this is so important, and you're doing such important work at the Rutherford Institute, and your books that you have written, and once again, your most recent book, Battlefield America, right here. I think everybody should get a copy of this, and hopefully you don't stay awake too long after you read it. But it's important, and of course, we agree so strongly with John on waking up the American people. He said something very favorable that I say all the time about there are young people out there and we can reach them. It's just that if you're in Washington, I'm glad that John doesn't live near Washington. He gets a little bit a better chance of a better perspective, because in Washington it is so bad and so different. But if you get away and talk to some of these people and go to the campuses, although it's still a smaller group, but remember, we only need 7 or 8% in leadership positions to change things. You don't need the 51%. That 7 or 8% has to convince the 51% to go along with these ideas, rather than going along with that 7 or 8% who are in charge now of our government, the media, and the movie theaters, and everything else. So that is our goal. And once again, John, thank you very much for being with us today. And to the audience, please come back to the Liberty Report soon. Thank you.
Thank you.